Welcome to the Graceful Exit podcast. I'm Kimberlee Hoertz, founder of the Graceful Exit, created to educate, empower, and support women as they navigate divorce. Beginning with us, we are putting a stop to the divorce stigma through meaningful conversations about the emotional and endearing experience divorce often brings. My hope is that you'll follow along on this journey and join our community of women navigating divorce with grace. Today we are here at the Graceful Exit, and I have the pleasure of talking with Yolanda Sanchez, who actually is one of our trusted professionals within the real estate division, but she also happens to be a divorcee. So she's going to give us a little bit of background and share your story, if you don't mind.
Hi, I'm Yolanda Sanchez, a realtor of over 15 years and a single mom of 2 kids. My son Lucas is 8 and my daughter is 15, Lola.
And so can you tell us a little bit of history about your marriage and then your divorce and then where you are today in your journey through it all?
I was married for 10 years together. Met him at 15, moved in at 18, and got married at 25. And then decided after our son, Lucas, just that I was ready for a divorce. I kind of like to think of when I had my babies, it's kind of like I had magnifying glasses on where I saw a lot of things that I kind of ignored. And with children, it just magnified it, and I just realized I needed to divorce my husband. Yeah.
And at that time, I think I remember you telling me that you were one of the first to go through a divorce of your friends and family. And so how did you navigate the whole process of divorce, and where did you start?
I just called a couple of attorneys, and I also called some paralegals just to see what the costs would be. And the retainers were anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 to get the case started. And one attorney said there's no cap; it can go on from there. Mm-hmm. And I just decided, okay, I can't afford that, and I need to figure out how to do this on my own.
Yeah, so that happens to so many women in our community, is that they're in a position where, one, they just can't afford it. 2, it's overwhelming to even think about. And a retainer, just for educational purposes, is an upfront cost that you have to pay your lawyer, and then they bill out of that. So at minimum, typically it's anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. But to your point, or your attorney's point, it can go up astronomically over months at a time. And so when you figured out that the cost range was just not happening, what are some of the steps that you took from there?
Yeah, I just went into the local courthouse and just asked if there was somewhere within the courthouse so I can get some help with this process. And someone directed me to the self-help desk. And so that became my resource, and I was there. I took it as a part-time job. I was going regularly and just getting guided along the way. They gave me a big stack of paper to fill out, which was the divorce paper. And it just felt overwhelming when I first looked at it all and filled it out, and then, made some mistakes and then just shredded it and started again.
So help me understand, what year was this when you started the process?
Trying to remember the year. I just know. So it was in 2013.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so back then, because electronic stuff has happened, I'm sure perhaps it may be done electronically, but back then it was all paper.
Yeah, back then it was all paper. It was all manually, with the pen and paper. You just filled it in with the pen. You put your case number on top, and then you just filled it in. And you needed a document and write down all your assets and just your credit card debt, your financials. We did own 2 properties together, and so we had to separate that as well. And I was, his debt was his debt, my debt was my debt, and his property was his and mine was mine. And
so you didn't have much back and forth about the actual asset split. How about the custody? Because you mentioned you had 2 children at the time. Did that ever become an issue, or I guess my question is, with the self-help piece of it, how does it work with custody? Do you propose something?
Yeah, so when you're filling out the paperwork, it asks you to document everything, your children and the scheduling of how you would like it, and just everything from the house, who gets what. You're basically proposing to the court how you would like things to
split.
Yeah, to be divided. And so it's up to the judge whether or not they're going to allow it to be split how you presented it. In my case, it was considered a default case. My ex-husband did not want to come to court. He was just kind of not wanting the divorce, and basically said, if you want it, you take care of it. And he just didn't have any intentions on even showing up to court. And so in that case, it's considered a default case. And so the court would just have to make sure that everything was in compliant with their laws. There was one thing that they had to change, which was the house that I had owned. It was considered community property, and so he had to sign a document, and I had to get it notarized stating that he was okay for me to have that property, since we had purchased it when we were married. And the condo, he had purchased it prior to us being married. And so that was the only thing that there was a discrepancy from what I presented to the court of my wishes, and that was awarded after.
So he did not contest anything then at that point, except for that property which you guys had worked through. What about the custody arrangements? What was your proposal on that? Do you remember?
Yeah, he did not contest anything, and he was aware that house was mine. I did purchase it, and the court just needed him to sign off on it. And then the children, we just decided to try to make it as fair as possible. He was off on the weekends, so he said he'd rather have them on the weekends on his days off. And so that was our arrangement. And then I had him during the week. And
then how about child support or alimony? Did you guys have to work through any of that?
That was one thing he asked, is for me not to ask for child support. And as I was going through the process over the 2 years, that's how long it took me, I decided to ask for it because I knew it was something I was going to need for the children and help me provide for them. And it was just going to be for them. And so I disagreed with his wishes, and I did ask for the child support on the second year of filling out that paperwork, and was awarded the child support.
So a couple things is, there's so many women in this community that feel like they don't deserve the child support or don't need it. What would your advice be?
Yeah,
given your situation?
I struggled with that myself, and where I was working at, some of the employees there had mentioned to me that, because I was kind of sharing with them my concerns and whether or not I should ask for it, and they said, we're fathers ourselves, and we have to pay it to our ex-wives for our children, and they just thought it would be a right thing for me to do and to ask for. They didn't see anything wrong with it because it is for my children. And so then I really thought about it and said, you know what, this is for them. And so I fought on their behalf for this child support. Yeah. One mistake I made was I assumed I had to provide pay stubs of my ex-husband's to show the court what he made, so they can, figure out how to calculate what I would get. It was a mistake of mine because it was an old pay stub that I had just found. It was a couple years old and it wasn't current, and they based it on that pay stub.
Interesting.
I didn't realize that they had access to see what he was currently making, and then could have, based it on that. It wasn't until a couple years later he went in and asked them to adjust it, and they realized that they were actually paying me less than what they should have based on that pay stub I had provided, and then they increased it.
Oh,
then,
interesting. So
yeah.
he went in thinking that he would get less or
Yeah.
have to pay less, but it
Yeah.
ended up being that he owed you more.
Yeah,
based
because
on the most recent.
they have access to get into, I guess, what they are currently making. So the courthouse does have access to see what it is that they're making, you know.
Interesting. So help me understand about the 2 years. Why did it take so long when you're going through self-help? Was that more on your end, or is that how long the courts take?
Yeah, it was more on my end because I was working full time, and I was just going in when I could. I kind of treated it like a part-time job, and the paperwork that they give you, it's a big stack. I'm assuming it's like 100 pages. I don't remember exactly, but I just wanted to make it right, and I just kept having to redo it. I would go to the self-help desk and present it, and then they reject it because I was missing a couple of things. They needed all the financials to be as current as possible. So within the 2 years, I had to kind of,
Resubmit,
adjust it. And so it took a little longer. And, I had a newborn baby I was also taking care of. So it was just the full-time job, having my young infant, and then trying to get to the courthouse and ask that self-help desk whether or not I was filling it out correctly. So that's...
Were you guys living together at this time while filing the divorce, or did you separate?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I was in the process of I had gotten the paperwork just to see what it looked like prior to giving birth to my son. And
that's a lot to take on.
Yeah, and I also had my father who was ill. He was on dialysis and didn't have much long to live, and I was actually caring for him at the same time, and let him know I was going to go through this process, and I had his support, but just not knowing what it was going to look like on the other side, and being afraid, but just being determined to do it more so for my children.
Yeah. And then how about your sense of community? Did you have any at this time, or were you the first of everything?
No, I didn't have anyone I can go to or ask for help, and I couldn't afford an attorney, and in my mind I thought, if I had the money, I can pay for the attorney, and they would be my support and help me along the way. I probably could have afforded it, but I didn't want to be in debt at the end of it, and so I made the decision to do whatever it took for me to do it myself, and it worked in my favor that my ex-husband didn't make it difficult. He just kind of stood back and trusted me, and I was very open with him and letting him know it was going to be as fair as I could, meaning his car was his cars and his debt was his debt and his condo was his condo, and so with that he didn't contest anything.
So would you recommend to others in this community to do the self-help?
Yes, I do recommend it. I do, for anyone that is looking to get it done, faster. It is possible, but I would say, you probably have to visit that self-help desk, more so. The courthouses near me, they did offer courses. They were just they were doing the classes when I was working, so I couldn't attend the classes, but there is that other resource you can go to. But the self-help desk was what I utilized during the process. And it wasn't until the very end, when you're kind of getting close, where they approve your packet that you submit, and then they're ready to schedule a court date where they'll actually sit down with you one-on-one and go through page by page with you.
Do you ever see a judge, or it's all done behind closed doors, or how does it work at that final process?
Yeah, so they do take you into a room, one of the clerks from the self-help desk, and like I said, it's only when you're actually your packet that they've given you, that you filled it out completely correctly, that they approve it. Then they schedule an appointment for you to come in and meet with one of their clerks, and then you get the court date once the clerk goes over it with you, make sure everything's correct, then they give you a court date, and it's usually a couple months out. And then the judge kind of goes through it all with you, and then they'll finalize it. But it takes a good couple of months after you sit down with the clerk to get that court date to go. And then they don't approve it right there and then. You'll get a letter in the mail. And in my case, they denied it because of the property. They needed that one piece of document that was notarized authorizing the property be given to me. And then once that was finalized, then actually, I'm sorry, no, they did finalize the divorce pending that one document with the property. They held off on that part. Yeah. Once I submitted that was final. I did get all the paperwork. It was kind of the paperwork for the divorce, and then the paperwork for the child what do they call
Custody?
it? The custody.
Uh-huh.
And then just the breakdown of how the assets were split, and that was it.
Got it. So that was 2 years of your life, and I think you mentioned that it's almost been 7 years since you filed.
Yeah.
So you've had time to adjust post-divorce what this new life is, and so can you kind of talk us through some advice you would give others once you get through the other side?
Yeah. So, I mean, as a single mom, you just think, can I do this? Is this possible? And my father had passed, my mom had already been passed, so literally it was just me and my 2 children, and I just I feel like I've gained a lot of strength and a lot of courage at the end of it all. All the self-doubt I had and struggled with kind of dissipated. And it just made me work harder than ever. At the time I was going through the divorce, I was working for a company full time, and they actually sold the property I was working at, and I was living there because when I was going through my divorce, I actually had to physically move out of my home because my ex did not want to move out in order for us to separate physically. And so when I moved into this apartment that I was working at and living at, they decided to sell. They said, you got 7 days to move. And that was one point in my life where I felt like, out of control. Like I had no control of, what was going to happen. And with prayer and God's grace, I was able to get out of that. I was able to move back in my home. The tenants happened to give me their notice. They moved out at the perfect time, and I decided from then on to be self-employed and to work for myself and not to ever work for anyone again.
Good for you.
And I've been able to do it, working in real estate and helping others, serving others, and I've been able to do better than I've ever expected myself to do.
So it's sounding like a lot of your joy is coming from the empowerment that you gained for yourself.
Yeah.
Being able to make it out of the trenches. Not only make it out, but successfully raise your 2 kids with a job that you love. And that you're doing well at.
Yeah, and their father is in rehab, so he is not available. He hasn't had, I guess, his shared custody for the last. It's been about 2.5 years that he'd been struggling, and now he's getting the help that he needs. I'm looking forward to him recovering and being a good father and helping with the care of his children, but in the last 3 years it's just been myself, and I took that serious, and I really have used that as momentum to help me in my business and to be the best mom I could possibly be, and I have been able to do so with God's help.
Yeah, well, you are definitely a shining light for a lot of us, especially those that are single mom trying to work full time and juggle it all. It is a lot. I can definitely speak on behalf of that. So you mentioned that you are a real estate agent, and you happen to be part of the trusted professionals within the Graceful exit. So question to you is, what drew you towards the Graceful exit and wanting to become a trusted professional?
Yeah, I just thought, wow, I wish I had this resource when I was going through my divorce and navigating through that alone. I just saw the benefit of the graceful exit and how it could help so many women like myself and empower them. And just, it's kind of like somebody holding your hand and walking you along the path of one of the hardest times that you could actually go through. It's first hard wrapping your head around, facing divorce. It's something you didn't anticipate on going through, and having that help and that resources just could make the difference. And because there were moments where I needed that, and I wish I had that, and somehow was able to get through without it. But it would have been nice to have.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, because I do think part of this is providing the education, but then also providing the community. And by you sharing your story and sharing the voice you have, the fact that you've gone on the other side of this, it's just an extreme example that never give up.
Yeah.
And you ended up being better on the other side. So you mentioned you've been in real estate for about 15 years. So where are areas of practice? Who do you specialize in? And just tell us a little bit more about your professional development.
Yeah, so my father was a veteran, so I tended to want to help other veterans, and I liked helping others, whether or not it's an easy. Let me see. I like to help others, and I tend to want to help veterans and others that may be struggling with purchasing a home or renting a home. I tend to do really well in those situations by writing letters on their behalf and advocating for them to get a home, or
I think the personal connection that you have with your buyers or sellers, that you take the time, you empathize with them, you share that compassion with them, which is often hard to find in real estate agents, because most, or some I should say, tend to have it very transactional. But by taking the time to know your consumer, which I know you firsthand love to do, I think that's so important.
Yeah. I listen to my clients on all their wants and needs and goals, and I really work hard to meet them as best as I possibly can. Whether it's a seller wanting to net a certain amount, I'll do whatever I can to create a bidding war, and I've done that very successfully, netting them $60,000-$70,000 above their asking price.
Oh, wow,
in the current market we're in, it's a little easier than it's ever been. And for buyers, I just really work hard to try to find them a property that they can afford in the areas that they want. And most of the time we're submitting multiple offers in order to make that happen. And I just prepare them for the journey and let them know not to give up hope. And and luckily I've been able to help them and just prepare them for what's to come.
So for our local community, what physical areas do you really represent? Is it kind of all over Southern California, or is there specific cities?
I don't turn down any business in California, but I do, of course, like to work as close to home as I can, which would be Fullerton and the surrounding cities, Brea, Yorba Linda, Placentia, La Mirada, Pico Rivera, Whittier, anywhere from LA County, Orange County, some of Riverside County. But I don't turn down any business in California. I've driven near Magic Mountain. I've
I can relate.
All over.
I can relate being a single mom. It's like you can't turn down anything, and you want to be able to help others. And real estate's just that perfect combination of both.
Yes,
so I think that's awesome. So now, thank you so much for sharing your story and empowering others. Is there any other tangible advice you would offer those women going through and navigating this crazy thing called divorce?
Yeah. I just say, if you have the money to get an attorney, I would use the Graceful Exit's resources of their attorneys that they've listed. I would definitely use Graceful Exit for a resource to find, you know, the professionals that you're needing. I would utilize that as much as you possibly can, and then if you're unable to afford an attorney, you can use the self-help desk at any courthouse. They usually have one. If not, they'll direct you to a courthouse that does have that resource. And it is possible. You can do it. You can get through it. And now you have one of the gifts I didn't have, which is the Graceful Exit, to use as a resource and to go to for questions. And and I'm able to also be available as well.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your voice, because it really does matter, and the sense of community that we're trying to bring to these women, to know that they're not alone, to know that they can get through it and get through it with grace. You are an absolutely amazing example of overcoming the odds, especially given everything that you've been through. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.